welcome to EPG Pathshala. Our today's topic is database triggers in MySQL. By the end of this session, you should be able to learn the following topics. What are database triggers? Why do you need triggers? Different types of triggers available in MySQL and implementation of same with different types of examples. So, first of all, let us start with what are database triggers. Now, if you recollect from the previous module, we had seen what are stored procedures. Database triggers are a type of procedures, but they are called implicitly. Stored procedures had to be called explicitly. You were supposed to write a call, a subroutine, or from some another program where you can call the procedure. But on the other hand, triggers are called implicitly. Triggers are based on certain DML actions, that is insert, update or delete. But why the name trigger is given? The simple example of gun we take, a gun has a trigger. What is the action of the trigger? As soon as the trigger is pressed, bullet has to be fired from the gun. So, that is the purpose or that is the associated action of a trigger. So, when we say that we are creating a database trigger, each and every trigger of mine should be associated with certain DML statements, the DML statements being either insert or update or delete. So, now let us see why do we need the database triggers actually. Triggers help us to enforce business rules. Triggers help us to validate the data before inserting. Triggers help us to maintain audit trail of the data or maintaining log record of the data. Triggers also help you to maintain security authorization. You can secure the data even before inserting. You can secure different types of database objects. Because triggers are stored into the database objects, because triggers are stored as database objects, they reside in the system catalog. There are certain special tables for storing the triggers as well. And as we all know that each and everything in an RDBMS should be represented as rows and columns. Similarly, triggers also are represented as rows and columns and they have a special mention in the system catalog entry. Now, apart from the certain advantages of the triggers, there are also certain limitations of triggers, very few limitations. So, let us have a look at few limitations of triggers. If many triggers are used, they will increase overhead on the system. Many triggers will make your system slow. Triggers being major two categories, row level and statement level. So, if I say that I have written a trigger on row level and if my table has got 1000 records, then the trigger will iterate for each and every row, which will make my system go very slow. So, it is always advised not to use triggers unless and until explicitly required. That is, if you have other options, if you have the options of calling explicitly, you should not make use of triggers. The second point being, triggers are not traceable. That is, if a programmer, a DBA writes a trigger on a table, there are possibilities that after 6 months, if you are looking at the table, you might have forgotten that you had written the trigger and you might not understand why your table is not inserting data or why it is not updating data. So, the log maintenance of triggers is difficult. Moreover, triggers cannot be called by information schema, that is, information schemas also are a view of system related tables. Triggers can only be activated onto the tables and not onto the views. Triggers also cannot be called by outside APIs, that is, you cannot invoke a trigger from some third party control. So, apart from these limitations, triggers though provide us with many advantages, auto implementation of rules and the integrity constraints. So, let us have a look at the syntax of a trigger. The syntax of a trigger goes into detail, like each and every parameter is really important in trigger syntax. Definer, the first parameter, as we had already seen in the previous version procedure, that definer specifies the user authorization. By default it is the current user. When we say, usually we write create trigger, trigger name and then the parameters. Definer becomes an optional parameter. So, when I will be giving the trigger name, the two important events associated with trigger are the trigger time and the trigger event. Trigger time has two broad categories, before and after. So, if I am writing before event, the actions will be before any DML statement is executed. If I am writing after event, it will be after the DML statement is executed. The triggering event is insert, update and delete, on which I am firing the trigger. Then it goes like on table name for each row. So, it has to be processed for each and every row. Now, trigger order is the optional parameter specified when your table has called multiple triggers on the same action. For example, if I have got employee table and I have got two triggers on before update, then which one will be fired first and which will be fired next has to be decided on the basis of trigger order. So, you need to specify either follows or precedes the another trigger name, but the trigger order is only useful when you are using multiple triggers. If there is a single trigger on the single event, there is no need of specifying the trigger order. After trigger order comes the trigger body part, where I will be specifying what action is to be taken, whether the constraints are to be enforced, whether the lock table is to be created or a separate audit trail is to be maintained. All those things will be part of trigger body. So, when we see the event part into detail, the events of triggers are specified as insert, update and delete. Insert will be fired whenever a new row is inserted, update will be fired whenever existing row is modified, and delete will be fired whenever existing row is deleted. But here again remember that these events are dependent on before and after. If I am writing an action on insert, it is important what I have specified, whether I have specified before insert or I have specified after insert. Similarly, it goes for update, that is I have specified before update or I have specified after update. Delete I have specified before or after. Usually triggers on delete will be maintained only to keep the log of the record, because when the data is deleted, the only thing which is maintained is what and how many number of rows were deleted. The body part of trigger might have certain limitations or might have certain restrictions. We say that in the body part we are maintaining a log, we are enforcing constraints, we are maintaining security, we are checking for security authorization. But there are certain statements which are not allowed in trigger body. That is, I cannot lock the transactions into trigger body, lock table statements are not allowed, alter table statements are not allowed, and similarly alter table, alter view, anything such statements are not allowed into trigger body statement, trigger body block. And if I am having multiple statements, that is I am writing multiple insert scripts, I am using multiple if conditions, it is always compulsory for me to make use of begin and end block. So, let us now start with the basic example of trigger, but before we go to the example of trigger, two important variables related with trigger are as follows. Two important variables related with triggers are as follows. The two keywords which are used with triggers are old and new. Now, when I am making use of old and new, first of all I need to understand what is old or what is new. Old will be the data which is going to be changed, new is the data which is to be implemented. So, if I take example of simple insert statement, in insert I will not have any old value, I will just have the new value. But if I am making use of update, I have got the old value also and I have got the new value also. So, if I am saying update employee set salary is equal to 4,000, where employee ID is equal to 5. So, if my salary previously was 3,500, my old value is 3,500 and new value is 5,000. Now, why do you need these two keywords old and new? Whenever you are making use of triggers, triggers are the blocks which are called implicitly. So, if a person is updating the data and if you want to maintain the log of the data or want to check what the data is inserted, the two keywords provided by MySQL are old and new, which will help you to keep trace of the data being updated, deleted or whatever new is inserted. It is always important to remember that insert will not have new old values and delete will not have new values. Update will have both values, that is old as well as new. So, we start with the basic example first of defining a trigger. Here we have our table called employee, which has the fields like employee ID, name and salary. So, let us have the example of defining a simple trigger. Here if you observe, my table is employee. As soon as I want to go to define a trigger, you need to click on alter table. Your alter table opens the table structure, your table name, your fields. Here you have indexes, foreign keys, triggers, partitioning and options. So, we want to define a trigger. So, we will go into the triggers part. Here you can observe that we have different types of triggers available: after delete, after insert, after update, before delete, before insert and before update. As soon as you select a particular event, first we write a trigger for insert. So, here when we select a trigger, and here you can observe add trigger is enabled as of now. So, let us select the event and create a log for the insert table, insert trigger. So, when you want to define the trigger, first of all we will create a log table for defining the trigger. My log table would be like, I have created one log table which has the same fields as employee. As you can see, I have got employee ID, name, salary, but I have added two fields, action and updated date. In action, what I want to store? That the trigger is fired by insert or update or delete, that is what I want to store in action. So, this is nothing but my log table. The name I have given is employee log. Employee ID, name and salary, please make sure that you keep the same data types which are there in the employee, and two extra fields, action as well as updated date. So, now when you have created a log table, so what we do when we create a trigger on insert, let us create a trigger on insert and we will maintain a log in the log table. So, we will right click and alter our table to define the after insert trigger. As seen already, our table contains employee ID, name and salary. In trigger, I select after insert and I click on add trigger. As you can observe, as soon as you click on add trigger, it will automatically use your database schema, the default delimiter which we had seen in the previous class, in order to pass all the statements together to the compiler. Here by default it gives the name create trigger employee after insert on employee table for each row. Now, what I am doing, I am only adding all the data into the employee log table. So, I will say insert into employee log values. Now, what will I use over here? As discussed, two parameters, old as well as new. So, here we are inserting into the log table, but we are writing on before and after insert. So, as I had told you, insert will always have new type of values. So, I will say new dot employee ID, new dot name and new dot salary. That is it, but my action is insert and my date will be system date. So, in order to insert the system date, the function we use is now. You end the insert statement and when you click on apply, as you will observe that it will automatically add certain delimiter and all that stuff. And also to be observed over here, the add trigger statement changes to the delete trigger once your trigger, once you start writing your trigger. So, after finish, now in order to test, we need to go onto the SQL prompt, and here if you observe, the trigger employee A insert is available already. Now, to test, I need to insert a row into the table in order to test my trigger. So, first of all, let us see what are the data available in employee table. I have 6 rows, 8 rows available already. So, I will insert employee ID 9. So, I will write the insert statement, insert into employee and values. I will say employee ID 9, whatever the name you can write, and the salary. So, as soon as you insert, the corresponding record will be inserted into employee log table as well. So, here one row is affected I can see, but now I will go and check into the employee log table. So, select star from employee log and I have the data as well as I should have the action and the date. Oh, I displayed the vertical output, and yeah, let me tell you, if you want to display the vertical output instead of horizontal, you can press Ctrl Enter. So, again displaying you the routine output which people are used to actually. So, here 9 Raj, salary is 5000, but my action is insert and the date on which I have inserted the record. So, this is about now when we saw that after insert trigger we have added. After inserts, whenever you write an event on after, it will be usually maintaining a log, and if you write an event on before, it will be usually validations or the constraints. So, every time afters are dedicated for audit trials and befores are dedicated for constraints or checking of proper insertion or updation of data. So, next example, now let us have a look at before insert, that is before inserting how can I validate my data. So, before insert, again I have to go to the table. Here you can see in your triggers list already one trigger is displayed. I alter the table, again I go and select the trigger, I select before insert and I click on add trigger. As it is, again as you can observe, it automatically gives the name, and here I will check, here we will write that if when the user is entering the data, if the salary is less than the current salary, or if I say that if salary is equal to 0, that is when a new user is entering the data, if salary is 0, then by default minimum salary I want to keep 100. So, we have written if new dot salary is 0, then set new dot salary is equal to 100, apply, and when you click on apply, delimiter is added, certain drop trigger statement is written, because if trigger already exists it will replace it. And now, in order to test the trigger, let us go onto the SQL prompt and insert the value with salary 0. Okay. So, in order to finally commit the changes, I have closed the table. I say insert into employee values, the employee ID, name, but make sure that salary here you enter 0 in order to see the effect of before insert trigger. So, here I have written 0, again 10 number already exists, that is why it is telling me primary key. I am inserting 11, 1 row is affected, and when you say select star from EMP, it will display you 100 by default, because we have said that 100 is the value, right. So, before triggers are basically, as I told you earlier, are basically used for validating the data even before it is inserted. But each and every part, whether it is insert, whether it is update or it is delete, will have its own characteristics. Insert might behave differently, update would behave differently, and delete would behave differently. So, let us now take a look at update trigger. So, first, each and every example we are looking at is, first we look at after and then we are looking at before. So, first example we are talking about is after. So, alter the table, again go into triggers. Now, here before creating after update trigger, I am creating one more table called employee log 1, where I want to maintain the detailed description of what actually user is doing. In any of the DML statements, that is whether the user has inserted or updated or deleted, I maintain one table which has the fields called user as well as description. Whatever is done by the user is stored into that table. So, first of all, when we look on to after update trigger, we maintain one more table called employee log 1, which has two fields, username and description. So, here my employee log 1 I have created. I have created two fields, username as well as description. Now, here if you observe, I have not kept any primary key. Make sure you do not have username as primary key, because user will remain same. If I am using it on local host, then user is always the same. User, for example, is always local host, or user, for example, is always root. So, if you keep user as primary key, immediately on your next record you will keep getting error of duplicate entry for the trigger. So, make sure that you do not assign it as a primary key. Now, we go to employee table, we go to triggers, and here we already have two triggers. Now, we have to select after update and we click add trigger, create trigger employee after update and after update on employee for each row. Now, what we want to do here, we are entering into employee log 1 the values. What values? I am adding username as well as description. So, for username I can make use of user function, and for description I am using the concatenate function, and I will be concatenating the string with the fields. So, to concatenate, what we are maintaining? We are maintaining individual records. So, what user is doing? User is updating employee salary, that is update employee. You can write update employee record. I have written update employee salary. First thing I am displaying is name, old dot name first of all, and then old dot salary. So, what is the salary which was present already? So, old dot salary, if you observe, I have first written into quotes and then I am using the field old dot salary. After old dot salary, new salary, what was the previous salary, what is the new salary, that is what we are displaying here. So, old dot salary, new dot salary, and closing first the bracket of concate and then closing the bracket of insert, but I have not written values over here. So, first of all I need to change and write values over here and apply. So, as soon as you apply here, just cross checking all the fields are covered, old dot salary, new dot salary. You should always cross check the syntax before applying. So, now when you click on apply, the delimiter which is added by default and executed the script, and in order to test, now we need to test this onto the SQL prompt. So, in order to test the after update trigger, I will have to go to the SQL prompt and I update employee's salary. So, update employee. First of all, viewing the details from the employee log table. So, employee log is as of now blank. Employee table has got 9 to 10 records. So, here I am selecting one employee from employee table whose salary I will update. So, I am saying update employee set salary is equal to salary plus 500, all the employees I have updated. So, as you can see 8 rows affected, and now when I want to when I go and view into the employee log 1 table, it will display me the detailed analysis of what is done, what was the old salary of the employee and what is the new salary of the employee. So, old salary being here, as you can see, the old salary is 800, which is changed to 1300 and so on and so forth, because I did not give any where condition. So, what did we do here? In before update or in before insert, we were validating the data. In after insert or after update, we are maintaining the log of the changes done or log of the actions done by the user. So, because we saw after update, now let us have a look at before update. What check will I make? That is simple. When I say when employee tries to update the salary, there should be certain validations before updating the salary. So, such type of scenario can be added onto a before update trigger. So, let us have a look at before update trigger. So, again into my employee table, alter and triggers, and I say before update trigger, add trigger before update on employee, and here we would put a check on the salary, that whenever employee is updating the salary, if the salary to be updated is less than the current salary, user should be given the message that cannot reduce the salary. But here one important thing to note is how do you give the output back to the calling program. First of all, we use both the values, that is new dot salary as well as old dot salary. Here we have declared a variable called message of varchar 100. If I check if new dot salary is less than old dot salary, I am making use of a statement called signal to pass the message to outside. Here I am saying set message is equal to salary cannot be reduced. But the question is, how do you pass this message outside to the user? You cannot directly give the message back from the trigger. So, to give the message back from the trigger, a special statement called signal is used to return to the calling program or to the outside program. Signal has an error class, warning class, unhandled exception. This type of exceptions are available into signal. So, whenever I am making use of the error code 45,000, it is general unhandled exception. You can have a look at list of available error classes onto MySQL workbench page or MySQL documentation. There are n number of classes available. So, here we will be making use of signal class and we will see how we use signal class. So, I will say signal and SQL state is 45,000 as mentioned earlier. It will be for any general exception, and I am passing my error message. So, what is my error message? You can also directly write the message here, message text is equal to whatever, but because I wanted to show the declaration, I have written set message text is equal to message. So, whenever the user will try to reduce the salary, user will get the message of salary cannot be reduced. Okay. So, clicking on apply will create our trigger. And now to test on the command prompt, you try to update. First of all, select here the salary is 1300 of Raj. I will try to reduce the salary and I will say update employee, set salary is equal to 100, where employee ID is equal to 1. So, it will show me the message that salary cannot be reduced. Okay. So, dear friends, we saw the examples of before insert, before update, after update. In the next module, we will be looking at before delete and after delete, which will be followed by understanding views. So, for today's session, that is all for today's session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.